I'm Lee Moore,
I'm Rob Moore.
and this is not quite the Chinese literature podcast.
Not the normal month's offering, anyway.
So today, before we enter the main podcast, we just wanted to let the listener know we're interrupting the series on Pusong Ling for an interview that we did with Antonio Leggieri. And I apologize, Antonio, for slaughtering your last name, but you've already been so kind as to excuse our horrible Italian when we were talking that I hope you'll be okay with it now. We talked with Antonio. He's based at a university in southern Italy, and he is doing a PhD on the Guzhang Juechen. And we had a really fascinating interview with him during the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. I know we're releasing this a little bit as the crisis is kind of abating a bit, possibly. We just wanted to let the listener know kind of the context for where this podcast with Antonio was coming from.
Right.
So now on to the podcast with Antonio. I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast. Today we have a very special guest joining us.
We are talking with someone not from Oregon, but not even from the U.S. Antonio, I'm going to mispronounce your last name. Antonio Leggieri?
Okay, well, it has been molded in much worse ways.
Awesome.
You're not that bad,
I'm going to give you a pass for that.
So we are interviewing Antonio, who is a fellow traveler in Chinese literature. We're going to be talking to him about a text that Lee and I have never read. And I don't know about Lee. I'd never even heard of it, which is exciting. I mean, Chinese literature is so broad that the idea that you will know everything is silly. So this is exciting to find something new. Antonio told us earlier he is from the part of Italy that we would just call the boot, right? The heel of the boot there. So Antonio, tell us where you're at right now.
Thank you for having me, Lee and Rob. My name is Antonio Leggieri. I am an Italian young scholar. I don't know if I can still consider myself young, but I still do, so it's fine. In Chinese literature, actually, right now I'm at NTU, the National Taiwan University. I've been here since January, and before that I was in Austria at the University of Vienna. But my alma mater, like my main university, is University of Salento, which is, as you correctly said, it's in the heel of the boot. I have a background actually in translation and interpreting, and those are the two activities that I actually still do, let's say, for a living, because I mean I consider myself like fairly good at that, not the best translator or interpreter. So I'm already learning from Rob to be modest, in case you didn't know.
So you're doing a PhD down in the south of Italy. You are working in Taiwan right now, which is actually a much better place to be because right now we're recording this during the coronavirus.
Although, Lee, if I could just jump in, this does reduce the amount of drama I was hoping to have in this podcast. We could introduce Antonio. I was like, so Antonio, tell us what it's like in Italy, but he's not there. So, although I have to say it is kind of cool that you're at the National University of Taiwan. That is one of mine and Lee's sort of dream positions, is to be able to work there someday, because we're both huge fans of the scholarship in Taiwan.
Yep.
I would say I'm a huge fan myself. I have been here since January, so since before Italian experienced the whole virus outbreak. And well, the situation has been like this. Like for the first month or two, my relatives and my friends back in Italy would ask me on a daily basis, "So, did you get the virus yet? Did you get the virus yet?" I was like, "No, people, stop asking me about it." And right now the situation has reversed.
Yep. I can imagine that's got to be kind of weird.
So let's turn to the actual text that you're looking at for your dissertation, the Guzhang Juechen. Can you tell us a little bit about the text?
Yeah, okay. So it caught my attention, I don't know, 3 to 4 months before I actually applied for my PhD and I started reading it. It's a text which bears in its preface the date 1631. So we are already like in the late years of the Ming Dynasty. Like Chinese narrative was divided into the Zhang Hui xiaoshuo, so like the long novels which were divided by chapters, or we were looking at Hua Ben or Ni Hua Ben. So because I know like the term was controversial before and has been controversial ever since. Like let's call them like short stories by mainly championed by Feng Menlong and Ling Manchu. Like there were also in the same period some texts which were imitation of the classical Chuanqi tale, of the classical Tang Dynasty fantastic tale. And this text, I believe it stood out because it's a text which is 40 chapters long, and it's divided into 4 parts. And these 4 parts have, like each of them is 10 chapter long, and they are all telling a different story. The thing that I wanted to say is that these 4 parts are called Feng, Hua, Xue, Yue. So the wind, the flower, the snow, and the moon. And it's interesting that like when you read it together, I guess that Feng Hua Xue Ye is also a Chengyu, even though it's really not that much in use right now. And it's a Chengyu which comes to me something like a beautiful scenery.
Can I just jump in real quick? So to clarify, this is a collection of stories, and in the era in which it was written, this was a fairly, not a common way to go about it, but there are a lot of collections that come out of the Ming and early Qing. How would this compare content-wise to something like, Feng Menglong or Ling Mengchu's collections? Do they read similar, or is it very different?
Its whole conventions are still there. So introduction, poem, the author's brief musings about what the story is going to be about, or like about fate and about anything else. Lots and lots and lots of poetry going, like verses and stuff. It feels like it's an extended version of the short stories by Feng Menlong and Ling Manchu. But my first hypothesis was that having 10 chapters to work with, the author might want to try some kind of, let's say, more mental analysis of the character's personality. But that just doesn't happen, as you can imagine. It never happens. The author just fills the story with details. Some of them are interesting, and some of them are more trivial. So rather than having, let's say, one story of one beautiful woman and a brilliant scholar, in the first chapter you get a story about two smart scholars and 2 beautiful women who like run up together and so on and so forth. So it's like an extended version which is filled with much with many more details. But
so it's kind of Feng Menglong, Ling Mengchu, but just kind of like extra like sauce and extra whipped cream and a cherry on top. Is that right? I mean, not to be too flippant, but just for I mean, I know we're all doing PhDs, but for the listener out there who's not doing a PhD in Chinese literature, I'm just trying to kind of
right. And if I could chime into the extra sauce or whipped cream cherry on top thing, that's a big deal actually in an era when they're only really starting to feel out what does longer form fiction feel like. I mean, the vast majority of Feng Menglong's stories are a similar length, except for the Pearl Sewn Shirt. They're just starting to experiment with longer things. So the extra sauce idea is actually a huge deal if they are writing much longer stories here.
Antonio, can I ask you a question? So when you mention this set of stories has this 10-chapter structure, immediately, I mean, we're talking about 1631 publication. So immediately I'm thinking of Jinping Mei, which is a 100-chapter long novel, but each 10 chapters is structured in a similar kind of way, and that there is a kind of arc to each section of 10 chapters. Is the Guzhang Juechen, is that drawing off of Jinping Mei and other things circulating in this sort of 10-chapter structure?
Well, I think that structurally speaking, there is a connection, like with the Zhang Hui Xiaoshuo, which were like divided by, I would use the word like clusters, like 10-chapter clusters. And so it's clever of you to connect that with Jinping Mei, because also I thought of the book by Andrew Blacks, in which he described the texts from that era as having this like 10-chapter clusters. and like moving on like section by section, and each section was 10 chapters long. So yes, there's a connection. Another connection that I would like to point out with Jinping Mei and also with Shui Zhuan. Actually, in the preface of the book, these two works are quoted. And I'm sorry that I did not send you any like material in preparation. It basically says something like my clapping of the hands, because Guzhang is of course like applauding, clapping one's hands. Like my clapping of the hands aim for an aroma which is akin to the plum in the golden vase.
Oh, nice.
And
Nice.
and also, yeah, and then it goes into and then you can try to remove the dust from your body. That's Juechen, to like remove to rid oneself of the dross which is like connected to the mundane world. So you try to remove the dust from your body to resemble for a flavor or for a taste resembling the water from Mount Liang. So Liangshang Zhishui is of course a reference to the Shui Zhuang. So like these two texts are mentioned in the book, and I would say that also, well, it's not like they are the main source of inspiration or anything, but the first and the third chapters are roughly, let's say that they could be roughly connected, meaning that they say they tell the story of like county scholars who marry entertainers. And the Xue, so this was the first one. The third one tells the story of poor scholars who ends up marrying a daughter of a rich family. So I mean, then there are some sexual elements, but they usually come up in a context which is not really what Jinping Mei was about. And the remaining two chapters, the Hua and the Yue chapters, are a bit like they could define as, let's say, stories of brotherhood, of like a group of friends and what they do and their deeds and their adventures. So I mean, there could be a loose connection with Jinping Mei and with Shui Zhuan, even though.
Well, what's important there, though, the references themselves. That, I mean, it's interesting because that happens pretty frequently in that era. Name dropping like that is meant to do more than just, it's not meant to say, hey, this is just like Jinping Mei, but it's reminding readers that this is of a similar status or stature.
A very intertextual era.
Yes, extremely. Sometimes, and this is interesting and the reason I find that what you just mentioned interesting is because it's usually not explicit. There's usually thematic elements or stylistic elements that if you've read a lot of the literature from the era, is very clearly a nod, but it's usually not a direct shout out to another work.
Yeah, that's true. And this was, or well, it looked like a direct shout out to other two works. I mean, I was first attracted to the book by this shout out, which was, as you mentioned, a lot more explicit. There are some scenes which may be directly influenced by that. I have already come across, let's say, intertextual parallelism, coming not from Jinping Mei nor from Shui Zhuan, but from one story of the Sanyan, one story from Guzhang Juechen, should be Guzhang Juechen 24, I guess. The scholar in the first story tries to convince this beautiful entertainer to run away with him, and she dresses up, actually she cross-dresses as a man, and some of that was already dealt with by Fan Menlong. I guess it was Guzhang Juechen 24, but yeah.
There's so much of this material that's kind of connected, but I am curious, you've talked a little bit about how you came across the work, but anyone studying literature from that era has so many choices. It's almost bewildering the amount of material you could study if you wanted to. What made you settle on this one in particular?
Oh, well, I was attracted by its structure. Because, like, as I told you, I only knew like long, full-length xiaoshuo novels from the era and the shorter huaben stories from the era, and I was intrigued by the fact that this book had got like 4 longer stories, and I wanted to delve deeper into that. So there is that element of let's say novelty, scholarly novelty. And well, the fact that it wasn't really a text that many people have read, at least like in academia, added a bit to the factor of novelty. So I think I was also trying to do something original. The first choice was once again going to the Huaben world, and
Right.
I guess that this can be also connected with Huaben world, because the Guzhang Juechen was also it was briefly mentioned in a book which came out in the year 1980. It's called Huaben Xiaoshuo Gailun, so like introduction to Huaben. It was briefly mentioned. There is a thematic connection with Huaben.
Antonio, are you translating this work?
I think I'll have to, just because. So I am planning to write the whole thesis in English, because if things go well, I may want to like publish it in order to get a broader audience. I'm writing my thesis in English, and I'm thinking of like translating excerpts of that, but I don't know. I'll have to, of course, consult a native speaker because of that, or like ask a native speaker to like publish my translation, because I'm not native by any means. But anyway, as for an Italian translation, I wouldn't know what kind of readership would that attract. Because so once again, I'm not trying to brag here.
Go for it. Do it.
Okay, thank you. You authorize me. I'm not trying to brag here, but yeah. 2 years ago, a collection of 14 short stories. The first 14 short stories from Guzhang Juechen by Famulong was published by an Italian publishing house. I translated those. I still don't know what kind of readership did they attract. I know it sold fairly well, but I also know that, for example, there are no reviews on Amazon. So I don't know, like, the people who read this book, what did they actually like about, if they did like anything. And also, well, that's also interesting, because the same publishing house recontacted me sometime later to translate 2 short stories of something that was completely out of my field of interest, but I did it anyway, which were 2 novels by contemporary Chinese writer Su Tong.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, so let's do that as well. So that's the end of my bragging story. I'm just saying that I don't know what kind of, I just don't know what kind of readership does Chinese literature attract in Italy.
Well, and the question of market there is interesting, because, like you said, in the U.S. too, if you try to market Chinese fiction, sinologists, like you said, will just read it in Chinese. But if you read a really good translation, there's something to be gained from that. Lee and I have both talked about David Todd Roy's translation of Jin Ping Mei, which is stupendous. Even if you can read it in Chinese, the English version is so good that it's worth reading in its own right.
And our Chinese friends oftentimes
refer
to the English translation.
Yeah, and for clarification's sake, I honestly think translation is an extremely useful tool. I mean, I use it frequently. When I'm reading the classics, I almost always have a good translation next to me to compare how I'm reading. So I think even among sinologists, you can market it, depending on how it's spun, of course.
I think we're coming to the close of this podcast. Antonio, what do you want the listener to take away about the Guzhang Juechen?
The book may not be only a receiver of influences. So like my first idea when I started this PhD, and that like was confirmed as I read the text, was that it's a text which deserves to be studied in an intertextual way, meaning it anticipates, and in doing so it predates what Liu would do a bit later with its own like twisted tale of the Huaben stories, like in which basically every Huaben every text that he wrote in text, what's it called again? In the Wusheng Xi, in the mute, the silent operas, is kind of a subverted version of a previous text. And here, I guess, you can find the same thing. So the style and the conventions are respected, but in doing so, it moves in a fluid way within those limits. So let's say that my research question was basically, was vernacular literature already mature enough in that era to be in a position to reflect upon itself? This was what this is what I am, let's say, preoccupied with right now, and what I am going to write about. One more thing that I wanted to say, like, just to keep this short and understandable, is that I may also have found two texts which, at least on the structural point of view, have been, or it looks like they have been directly influenced by Guzhang Juechen. So I found two texts which also bear the same structure of Feng Hua Xue Yue. So like of this 4-chapter structure, and with each chapter being a longer story, with each section being a longer story of more than one chapter. And so the first text that I want to mention, those are two texts which I think that the layman would call them something like 同志文学. What's the other term? Like 断袖文学, homosexual love affairs.
So if I could just pile
that's why, like one of them is called Bienar Chai.
Interesting.
Can I ask, because Li Yu himself, so you mentioned Li Yu, and I'm not entirely sure all of our listeners will know who Li Yu is, but if they're a close listener to the podcast, they'll know that the first podcast Rob and I ever published was on Li Yu's Tower of the Summer Heat, Rob, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So Li Yu does this same thing where he's playing around with homosexuality and these questions of inversions. We did one podcast on boy in Fujian, I remember the name of it.
The male mentions his mother.
Male mentions his mother, moves 3 times. And so is this set of stories that you're studying influencing people like Li Yu?
So Li Yu liked to present himself as like the champion of everything that was new. So I don't think he would be prone to recognizing such influence, but it's not a possibility that we can exclude right now. So, and it's not, I don't think it's implausible.
Yeah, because I mean, it sounds like
have read this book.
I mean, Li Yu is writing in the Qing, if I'm correct, right?
That's correct.
And we don't know who the author of this book is, do we?
No, of course not. We know his pseudonym, which is Jinmu Sanren. So basically the idol man made of metal and wood, or like of gold and wood.
Excellent. So like so many collections of stories in the late Ming and early Qing, this author does not want to put his name to the collection, which just signals the sort of low status of this fantastic fiction that we appreciate today, but at the time they didn't appreciate. So we don't know who this is, but this author may have influenced people as famous as Li Yu. It's entirely possible. I mean, it sounds like in terms of the sort of experimentation and inversion that this author is doing, this is something that's radically different and radically influencing what happens later on.
Yeah,
well, if I could just, because I think we need to start sort of bringing this to a close. For people who have not been exposed to much fiction from this era, I'll try to sell it a little bit in less technical terms by saying whatever else it might be, the vast majority of the stuff is a lot of fun. Narrative-wise, a lot of these early narrative forms, they move fast. A lot of strange things happen. There's a lot of beautiful writing in there, and it's, even though you can obviously write a heck of a lot about it and do a lot of scholarship on it, it translates well. And so definitely check this stuff out. I know talking to Antonio has made me really want to read this, because it's always interesting discovering a text you never even knew existed, and especially one like this that sounds like such a hinge, right, between longer fiction and shorter fiction. You don't get a lot of those, so it's pretty exciting.
So, Antonio, are you going to be able to keep us abreast of where you are in your translation, and if you get a publication?
I will. I will. And
Great.
will you keep us abreast? Like both of you, like keep me abreast with your research.
No problem.
Definitely.
Okay.
All right. Well, Antonio, it's been great to have you on here. I hope you stay safe, and I hope you're able to get some research done while you're in Taiwan, and that your family is safe during this trying time for Italy and the rest of the world.
Thank you, and I hope you're safe as well.
Yeah.
And it's really absurd that you are in the same town and you are not able to hang out together because of this thing which is going on right now.
As they say in Taiwan, 不花斗没办法, right? Like nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we should probably sign off. I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
Antonio, thank you for joining us today all the way from Taiwan via the very heel of Italy.
Thanks a lot. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. All right, see ya.